Today, I'd love to share with you every single trick that I know of to make the Fusion page of DaVinci Resolve 21 run just a little bit faster, and that includes a lot of undocumented tips, so make sure you stick around to the end. The first Fusion performance time-saving feature that I want to talk about is actually using the new checkbox that's in your project settings, so Shift-9 will get you there, on our Fusion that's called Downscale to Timeline Resolution for Timeline Clip Composition. Now, what the heck does this mean? Well, most of the time, we get footage that's much larger than the timeline we're delivering or working at. So this is going to automatically downscale the media ends to that timeline so we can get faster renders and processing. Like maybe you have a 12K camera and a 4K timeline. Same principle applies to you. For me today, I have a 4K clip, and if you see my timeline is 1920 by 1080. So traditionally, if I took my clip, which you can see is 3840 by 2160, so UHD, not 4K, what would typically happen, you go to the Fusion page, you work on all of those pixels. Maybe you never need them because you're working on a smaller res timeline. This allows you to automatically downscale them. Shift-9, go to Fusion tab, turn that on, click Save, and you'll see automatically it just jumped down to 1920 by 1080. And then if at the end of the day you wanted to render at the full resolution, you can certainly do that. You just might have 2 to 4 times the render times. The only thing that I found that this does not work with is with EXR sequences. So this one right here is an EXR render. So this one's 3840 by 2060, and even with that setting turned on, we're not getting access to the timeline resolution. And I understand that that has something to do with all the different passes that could be included in here that are not just the beauty pass. Maybe those don't downscale properly. So just know EXRs don't work, but it's a handy way to downscale everything to work faster right off the bat. The next thing is very similar, that it was in DaVinci Resolve 21. They added the photo album page. So if I go to my photo page, click my photo album, we also deal with really large resolutions with photos, right? There's some 60 something megapixel Sonys out there now. This one in particular, if let's load this up. You can see in the inspector file tab, it's a 33 megapixel photo, 7008. We're not actually seeing all those pixels as we preview and go through, because the computer would just be so slow to do that. So what the smart engineers at Blackmagic Design decided to do is, if you go under playback, you'll see photo album preview resolution is set to automatic. It's automatically downscaling it to what they think you should actually be seeing in pixels, which is not going to affect your output render at all. But where this comes into play is if we look at the Fusion page, because that's where you would paint something out or maybe add text. Let's take a look at what that means over there. So go to the Fusion page. Again, it was 7,000 pixels across. Now we're actually getting access to 3,000 pixels across instead. But if we want it to run even faster, you can do that. Playback. This is just the photo album preview resolution. Maybe we want to just work at quarter. You can see now it just sort of resamples, and everything now is showing 1,752 pixels across. Everything's going to run faster, but it's not going to affect your final output at all. Next Fusion performance tip I want to talk about is the performance mode that's hidden away in the user preferences. So what this means is if I load this clip over here, which is like ProRes video clip, and I hit play, as soon as I hit play, you'll see it went into float 16 as playback went on. And then if I pause it, it goes back to float 32. Now, DaVinci Resolve is float 32 rendering through and through, right? You can't get around that as far as I know, which is great because it gives us the most precision. But sometimes I actually need to see things playing back in float 32. So how do I get that? The way I would actually get access to that, and the reason, by the way, the reason I might need to see things play back in float 32, maybe I'm doing something where I'm stenciling something out, I'm blurring it, and I'm dividing it to do an in-paint. Well, when you play back something like this, it needs float 32 to actually calculate. Works fine when I pause it. How do I get it to playback? That's going to be under Preferences. So DaVinci Resolve, Preferences, User, Playback Settings, and right here, Performance Mode. Automatic means playback is going to be set to 16 float, and you can just turn that off with the Disable. And now if I play back, it's always going to give me that float 32 performance and playback. If you wanted to do some but not all, you can come back here, say manual, and optimize image processing relates to that bit depth. That would also give me that same, float 32 playback. And so that can be really useful to understanding why sometimes when you're playing back your footage, it looks different than when you actually go to render it out later on. Disable motion blur. Now, anything in the Fusion page of DaVinci Resolve that moves something, like the merge or a transform, on the settings tab, you'll see there's a checkbox to turn on the motion blur, and it will calculate it based off of the frames of where it came from and where it's going to. but this can be a lot of math that slows things down. So if you want the preview, just what's on screen on the viewer here, to not show that and go a little faster, you can just right click anywhere in this play bar over here, go to motion blur and deselect that checkbox. It turns it off here for the preview only, but the final render, when you export this out, it's going to have the motion blur. So it could just speed things up as you work. Next Fusion performance tip, I want to talk about rendering. So we can use disk cache and we can use savers and loaders. So the idea here is if you've already done a lot of work, you're happy with it, do a pre-render within your Fusion comp. So the saver is the best way to do that so that it's maintained between comp versions. The way you do that is shift space, saver. And the saver node is basically just saying, hey, at this point in the flow, I'm going to render everything out. My suggestion render settings for this, go to the Format tab, choose compression type to DWA256, which is DWAB, and leave the compression alone at 45. This is very similar to a ProRes 4444 file, except that it's linear EXR, and choose float 16. If you need it to not be lossy, which is what this is, it's relatively ProRes 444 sizes, you could choose something like, PIZ is in here, PIZ wavelet. That's a lossless EXR. However, file sizes get very large. If you know you need to use this, you probably know you need to use this. I'm okay with losing a little bit of information in the highlights, which is what DWAB does. Not losing dynamic range, it just will average pixels more. Now, if I go to the File tab over here, we got to name it, give it a location, click Browse. I'm going to give this a name that's called, Red Bronco V1, and then I always like to have two dots at the end here. The .exr is basically giving the render a place to separate the frame number that is pulled here from my Fusion comp number so that it's not butted up against my version number. That's all it's doing. And then we also need to make a folder here. So I'm going to give this, let's select all that across there. I'm going to right click to copy that name. We'll make a new folder, put it on the desktop because that's what you do in tutorials. Say paste. That's going to give me a folder to render to, hit save, and then to render it out, you go to the Fusion tab, say render all savers. Now before I do this, if you have multiple savers in your comp and you only want to render one specific one, the way you tell it to not render what you don't want to render is you just turn it off. So select your node over here, Command P, or just hit this little switch here so that you're only rendering what you intend to. When you go over here, say render all savers, and there it goes. I'll speed this part up. Okay, it's done. The lasagna has been baked. Let's load it back into the project. And we do that with a loader node. So I'm going to click over here in the empty space, shift space, LD, loader. And the nice thing about the way the loader works is it knows where I just did my last saver to. All you need to do is select the first image in the sequence, which is this one at frame 0997, click open. And at this point, what you can do is you can disconnect the flow and just sort of intercede here, take this straight to the media out. And look at this, I'm going to get real-time playback because it's playing from that rendered file. In fact, it should play back totally fine over here on the edit page as well, as if I had done something like a render in place over here. So this is a great way to do pre-renders on really complicated compositions. The other thing I want to mention too, besides the saver and loader workflow, is there's a disk cache option in Resolve Fusion as well. So the disk cache is more of a temporary raw file that gets written out to disk. It might make sense at the beginning of your comp to run noise reduction on something. And if I try to play back this noise reduction I have, you'll see down here, my playback currently is like, what is that, 6 frames a second or something. If I want to get that speeded up quite a bit, what we could do is cache this out to disk. Now, if you right click on the node, go to cache to disk, and just say pre-render, it starts to cache and render this out. But I want to point out where these actually, the files get located, is kind of buried and hidden inside your user library. And if you don't want that, if you want to control where these cache files go, because they're different from the edit page cache files, which I've talked about in the tutorial, I'll probably pop on screen. The best way you control where those go is just go to the Fusion tab here for Fusion settings, and we'll go down to the path mapping section over here, and go to disk caches. And what you can do is you can actually path map your disk caches by just pointing this here as a default for every time you start a new Fusion composition. So for instance, I have this set to an external NVMe SSD. So volumes, color box, resolve, diffusion cache is where I have this going into. which you can see is an external drive that's independent of the user library. So that can be really, really helpful, so that anytime I want to disk cache something, I'll right click and do that right now, cache to disk, say pre-render. It's generating those on a super, super fast drive that I can actually manage independently of this going into a internal drive that might get filled up really quick. So if I go to color box, let's find that same location. You can see this was created today at 10:43. The only thing I want you to point out here is these files here are much larger than, because they're these .raw files. They're basically 32 float. They're big files compared to doing a saver, which you can actually compress quite a bit by using something like DWA compression, as well as if you were to version this out later, this gets blown away as soon as you version the clip comps using something like clips and then right clicking and saying create a new composition. So it's a little fragile. It's still useful though, so I wanted to point that out in the same sort of rendering section. If you want to delete the cache that's in there, you would just go back to here again, right click on the node, cache to disk, and say delete cache. If anybody knows of a way to just delete all of these Fusion cache files automatically without going to the location on disk, please let me know, because I've yet to find that. So I'll just say delete cache, and yes, I'm okay to do that. Click OK, and you see the little icon in the node went away. I want to point out the size of the files of the DWA compression. These are 2 megabytes. Those others were 33 or 34 megabytes per frame. So that's one frame of video right there. So big advantage to using a saver with compression when possible. The next Fusion performance trick I've got is to crop into areas that you're working on and then uncrop them, place them back on the exact same pixel where they came from, and just merge the original background underneath them. So for instance, if I wanted to paint out an area of this truck here, I don't want to work and paint on this full 3840 image. I just want to work on that section of the door that has area I might clone from or paint to. So the way it works is first you add a crop node. Now I have a macro installed here that's actually called crop and a half. So it's overriding my default crop tool, which you can get as well if you want. It's available over at the website that I'm going to link down in the description from Stake Underwater. It's the We Suck Less Fusion forums. Second Band has made this available. It's incredible because what it has is this export inverted crop button that's on it, which saves a few steps. I'm going to show you how to use it without it and with it, so you can choose if you want to go download that as well and support the forum there, which I highly suggest you do. So crop and a half, the way it works, I will choose this on-screen widget that's up there that says allow box selection. And now on screen, I can just click and drag a box, and instead of doing 3840 by 2160 pixels, now I've cut the resolution down significantly to 1468. Looks like I've kept it across all the frames that I needed to. So that's a smaller, easier area to work on for sure. Now to get this placed back in the exact same pixels so that the final merge is the same size, what you do is you take a copy of this, so Command C, Command V, load this into the viewer, and we need to change a couple things. So the X and Y size is the resolution. I need to set this back to whatever the original resolution was, which this clip was easy. It was 3840 tab 2160, and then the offsets just need to be negated. So go to the beginning of there, put a negative, and this is just put this back in the exact same pixel location as the original. So what you do is you merge this little sandwich, this crop sandwich, over the rest, and then that's what you would send to your media out. And you do all your work in this section right here in the middle. So all your work happens here, and it's going to make things run much faster. Now, if you don't want to do this slow method, get the crop and a half tool, because it has export inverted crop, and it does just what it says. So if I take this and I say export inverted crop, it has put expressions in there already to place this back at the exact same location. So I didn't have to go in and type in the original resolution and the negative offsets at all. It's doing it for me. Domain of definition is another way that you can improve your rendering and playback time significantly. And the way that works is by going to the 3-dot options menu over here, and we'll go to region, and we'll say show DOD. And basically, once we do that and click in the viewer, you see this dashed line. Basically, this is the area that Resolve Fusion is going to do calculations on. So like the scaling trick I did with the crop tool or crop and a half tool, where I just went to this area, you can do the same thing with a set domain tool. So shift space, set domain. And this one does not require you to do replacement or like a uncrop afterwards. So with the set domain tool, we can go to the set tab over here, and we've got these on-screen red lines, which you can see it's basically cutting away, it looks like transparency in the areas where it's not calculating. I just want to make sure that I'm covering that door enough that I could paint and clone out on every frame. Probably not quite there, but this is effectively taking way less pixels out of the equation when I want to do work on it. Now, here's one thing with using the set domain tool. As soon as you add a tool, like you probably might think to do, the paint tool, and load that, you can see it expanded the domain addition to the entire frame again. So what I suggest you do is after you paint, come over here, shift space, do what's called an auto domain after it, and then it will shrink that domain back to that location, back to those bounds that were originally set, so that things would run faster. After all of this, you could come over here, do your painting work. This would just merge back over the top of the original, and you're going to get faster performance because we're only working on these specific pixels right here. Now, if you wanted this to be even more optimized, rather than just leaving this domain set as is, you could make sure when you're painting that you're excluding the paint to just the regions you painted on. So for instance, let's say I just wanted to do, I'll do a regular stroke here. In fact, let's just do white. How would I just exclude just this paint of just this white? Well, I would use a difference key before that. So shift space, difference key, and I would basically take the difference between what I painted on and what the original was. So basically this is what I'm looking for. You can see this domain is even smaller than it was before I inserted that difference key into there. So even better performance. Next tip I've got for you is to disable node updates. So what I mean by that is typically every node in Fusion is going to update on every single frame. But if you use a freeze frame, like a frame hold to paint something out specifically, you don't need it to update frame after frame after frame to see the cache in the window there. So what I suggest you do is after you do something like a time speed, which is really the best way to get a frame hold, like freeze frame. It's got this button right here, click it. Now every frame, it's that same frame so you can paint on it. Is what you do to disable the updates so it's not updating frame after frame. Right click on the node, go down to modes, and uncheck update. Now it's only loading once and not again. So that gives you a lot better playback speed for sure. But this also applies to the paint node. So let's load the paint node after this. And if I'm going to do some painting on this, I would generally choose the stroke mode, which paints on all frames. But more importantly, it's modifiable because it paints as modifiers, which are in a list over here. So I'm going to use the clone to do this. And I'll just start painting. I'm just going to do this really quickly. You can see this list is going to grow as I work. And the thing is when you start getting lots and lots of clones, it can start to feel slow. So I've got another tip that's coming up right after this that's going to help clear that cache out. But if you right click on the node and go to modes, disable update, you're still going to get the results of this paint, but it's going to be much, much faster because it's only referring to one frame getting loaded into the cache. It works much, much nicer. So I would say freeze frames, make sure you disable update. Clearing cache. Cache can be sort of buggy sometimes and it can fill up and you might be wondering, am I seeing things correctly? The other thing with the paint, if you do tons and tons of clones, especially across multiple paint nodes, one thing you can do to clear the paint cache is, oddly enough, this is undocumented, but if you go over here to the select tool, as soon as you hit select, it's kind of like cleansing your paintbrush, like running it through water. It clears out the cache from everything that was prior, and then go back to your stroke mode again, click something if you want to paint, and then do some more painting on top of paint, however you want to do that. And then every once in a while, come back to the select tool and it clears out the node cache for that paint. Now, the other way you can clear cache for a whole composition is down here in the lower right where it has this number. This is your RAM usage. If you right click down here, you can say purge cache or re-render current frame. I'll just click purge cache, and that clears out. You'll see there's a green line that was down here. That's the RAM cache. It clears everything out, so it will be regenerated the next time you go and start to play back. You can see it's filled up with green again. The last performance trick I got for the Fusion page is called Proxy. Now this Proxy is different from the edit page where you're actually using a different file temporarily and changing from play originals or play original media. What this is doing is changing the viewer over here to a lower resolution. And the way it's activated is by right-clicking in this transport bar over here. I'll right-click and turn on Proxy. Now, auto proxy is something different. It has to do with changing the sliders in the inspector. I don't even use that. Just turn on Proxy here. And then the way you actually, nothing should have changed initially. But if I zoom in, let's look at the badge here where it says black diamond. So that'll give you an idea what's actually happening to the image. It's going to down-res based off of playback, timeline playback resolution. The reason nothing happened when I first clicked is because it's set to full. But if I change this to half, we'll see that logo start to go away. As my viewer only, my viewer has changed. You see it's a little bit rougher. And if I go back to timeline playback resolution quarter and zoom in to that same area, it's very much gone. So here's the deal. We're still operating at 3840 by 2160. We're just giving the computer a lot easier time to play back because it's only going to show us, right now it was set to timeline playback resolution quarter. So a quarter of this, UHD size, which can help a lot. Now, something that is often missed, or I didn't even understand when I was first diving into this, is the Fusion settings under the Fusion tab has a section under General for Proxy, which has this default set to 3:1 for auto proxy and standard. This has nothing to do with how Proxy is displayed on the Fusion page of Resolve. This is from Fusion Studio, as a lot of the stuff in this page here is as well. So you can probably disregard that. Just know you've got a few different options of proxy. I think most of the time I would come over here and just choose this to half. And that's going to give me enough that I can play back and see animations well enough to see if I've got an issue. And if you ever need to turn proxy off at the end of the day, just come back down here, disable that proxy, and you can see now I've got full access to seeing every single pixel. Oh, and while we're here, this is not performance related, but to see every single pixel like this, come to your 3-dot options menu and turn off smooth resize, which is like this automatic viewer blur, which I generally just always disable that. And then I save it by right-clicking in the viewer and I say settings, save defaults. Hey, my name is Chadwick. I'm a DaVinci Resolve master trainer, training partner based here in New York, and I do training one-on-one over Zoom. So if you're interested, reach out to me through my website, and I'd love to connect with you and help you with anything DaVinci Resolve related. It doesn't have to be Fusion. Just know I'm available for training at least this next month for a short time, so I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for watching, and because there's so much more to learn, I'll see you in the next video.